The Middle East, which lived in peace and prosperity under Ottoman administration for 400 years, entered a highly chaotic period after falling out of Ottoman hands as a result of the First World War and has never achieved stability since that day. The process leading to the establishment of a state for Jews in the region officially began with the promises made by the British in 1917. Jews brought to Palestine from all over the world finally declared the establishment of a state named Israel on Palestinian lands in 1948. The great powers of the era almost entered a race to recognize and legitimize this newly established Jewish state. A few hours after the Jews declared their independence, 5 member countries of the Arab League declared war on Israel. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War was the first major conflict in which a coalition consisting of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq acted against the newly founded State of Israel. While Arab nationalism was rising in these countries, which had recently gained their independence from colonial powers, the defense of Palestinian lands became a common goal. The Arab armies initially posed a serious threat to Israel, gaining superiority in the first weeks of the war. At this exact moment, the United Nations intervened with a 4-week ceasefire that worked in Israel's favor. During this ceasefire, Israel increased its strength with heavy weapons and support coming from the West. While the United Nations ignored this despite the arms embargo. With the end of the ceasefire, a strengthened Israel launched a counterattack. In the Arab armies, lack of communication and tactical incompatibility led to weaknesses. During the course of the war, Israeli forces intensified the attack by exploiting these weaknesses. Additionally, Israel received significant aid from the Soviet Union during the war. Soviet planes bombed the capitals of Jordan and Syria, and many civilians lost their lives in these attacks. Ultimately, unable to withstand these attacks any longer, the Arab states were forced to sign peace agreements with Israel. According to these agreements signed in 1949, 78% of the entire region was left to Israel. Thus, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War came to an end. As a result of this war, more than 400 villages and 11 cities were destroyed. More than 700,000 Palestinians were driven from their lands and became refugees. More than 13,000 Palestinians were martyred, and more than 30,000 were injured. Arabs called this war Nakba, meaning the Great Catastrophe. From this moment on, nothing in the region would ever be the same. Israel quickly took action to destabilize and stir up the surrounding Arab states that posed a threat to it. In February 1949, Sheikh Hassan al-Banna, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood movement, the greatest rising power in Egypt, was assassinated and martyred. A month later, a coup occurred in Syria. 4 months later, a coup attempt took place in Lebanon. King Sharif Hussein's son, Abdullah of Jordan, was assassinated. In Egypt, King Farouk was overthrown by a military coup, and Egypt transitioned from a constitutional monarchy to a republican regime. After a while, a bloody coup would also occur in Iraq, and King Faisal II would be overthrown and murdered. Thus, the monarchy ended in Iraq, and a republican regime was established. Consequently, with the influence of intelligence agents swarming the region, the entire area was entering an increasingly chaotic process. Following Syria's liberation from the French Mandate and gaining independence in 1946, the first president of independent Syria was Shukri al-Quwatli participated in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War with the aim of preventing the establishment of the State of Israel. Being a staunch Arab nationalist, he instructed his soldiers to destroy the Zionists. For this reason, Shukri al-Quwatli became a primary target for Israel. Immediately after the war, a coup was carried out by Colonel Hosni al-Zam with the support of the United States, and Shukri al-Quwatli was overthrown and exiled with CIA backing. This coup would be the beginning of military coups in the Middle East. The first actions of Hosni al-Zam, who came to power with American help, were banning the wearing of the Ottoman fez, claiming it was outdated, and initiating moves to open the way for women to vote and hold public office in Syria. While Colonel Hosni al-Zam strove to transform the country into a fully secular structure, he also offered to settle 300,000 Palestinian refugees in Syria, to obtain aid from the West for the Syrian economy. Thus, with the settlement of some Palestinians on Syrian soil, the State of Israel in Palestine would find some relief. On the other hand, the agreements he made with US oil companies caused increasing anger among the British and Arab nationalists. A few months later, he was overthrown and executed as a result of a coup carried out by Colonel Sami It was rumored that the British had a hand in this coup because the first act Sami al-Hinawi attempted was the project to unite Syria with the British-controlled Hashemite Kingdom of Iraq. The British had long been looking for an opportunity to achieve this unification and push the United States out of the region. However, 4 months later, another coup occurred, and Sami al-Hinawi was overthrown. The coup was carried out by Colonel Adib Shashakli, a subaltern of Kurdish origin. Adib Shashakli absolutely opposed the attempts to unite with Iraq. A serious rivalry between Britain and America was evident in the region, so much so that, although Britain was the state that exerted the greatest effort for the Jews to establish a state in Palestine, it had still not declared its recognition of the established State of Israel as late as 1950. It was also a fact that they were initially hesitant to recognize Israel due to the Arabs under their protection. However, the Jews preferred American patronage over the British and seemed to have started walking the path with America in the region. At that time, the rising power in the world was no longer Britain, but America. After a while, this British-American rivalry in the region would result in America's superiority, and Britain would lose its world hegemony to America and the Soviets. On April 28, 1950, Britain was forced to officially recognize Israel. Syrian President Adib Shashakli, on the other hand, turned Syria into a military administration and dissolved all political parties. He banned all newspapers that did not support him and implemented an oppressive administration. This situation led to great reaction in the country and another coup in February 1954 in which Adib Shashakli was overthrown. Among the coup plotters were members of the Syrian Communist Party, Druze officers, and members of the Ba'ath Party. During these dates, the political influence of the Soviets began to increase in the region. Since America supported Israel unconditionally, Arab states that were strictly against Israel began to move closer to the Soviets. Gamal Abdel Nasser, who came to power in Egypt in 1952, placed great importance on strengthening his country militarily and achieving a superior position against Israel. For this purpose, he began to approach the Soviet Union and started buying weapons through Czechoslovakia. To provide the economic power Egypt needed, he announced that he had nationalized the canal company that operated the Suez Canal. Thus, the Suez Canal, under British and French dominance, was directly tied to Egypt. This situation created a Deprem earthquake shock effect in Britain and France. Immediate action was taken. The British and French joined forces with Israel to take back the Suez Canal and attacked Egypt. These states, arriving in the region with many aircraft carriers, managed to defeat the Egyptian units in a short time and seize the Suez Canal. However, the United States and the Soviet Union took a stand against this attack by the British and French. The joint stance of the US and the Soviets against the war was one of the rare events of the Cold War. The Soviet Union sent an open ultimatum to Britain and France, stating that if they did not withdraw their troops from Egypt, it would launch nuclear attacks on the cities of London and Paris. The United States had also left Britain and France alone in the face of this Soviet threat. One of the reasons for America's opposition to this operation was the fear that anti-Western movements in the region would strengthen and Arab countries would lean toward the Soviets. Soviet influence in this region, which was very important due to oil, would be unacceptable for the US. Ultimately, Britain and France had to back down in the face of this Soviet threat, declare a ceasefire, and withdraw their troops from Egypt. The most important result of this event, which went down in history as the 1956 Suez Crisis, was showing the weakness of European states. It became clear that Britain and France, which had absolute dominance over the world 50 years prior, could no longer act without the support of the United States. This situation was an open declaration that world hegemony had passed from Europe to the US and the Soviet Union. The Suez Crisis would be the last Operation Britain conducted without the support of the United States. After this date, Britain would accept America's superiority and would not engage in any operation without its support. Thus, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who had gained the absolute support of the Soviet Union, obtained great popularity in the Arab world by taking the Suez Canal from the British and nationalizing it. In the same period, another rising power in Egypt was the Muslim Brotherhood movement founded by Sheikh Hassan al-Banna. This movement, which opposed Nasser's secular order, was also a Sufi movement. They advocated that it was necessary to perform jihad against the Kufa infidels and that the state should be governed not by secularism but by Sharia in accordance with Islam. The Muslim Brotherhood movement transformed into the largest and most widespread mass movement not only in Egypt but in the entire Arab and Islamic world in a very short time. In the 50s, the effects of the Cold War began to be clearly seen in the region. Al-Quwatli, who became the president of Syria again in the 1955 elections, initially tried to pursue a neutral policy between the US and the Soviets. However, in 1956, he began to turn toward the Soviets to receive economic and military aid. He was somewhat forced into this because leftist groups were extremely influential in the Syrian army. Additionally, a path toward an alliance was taken by approaching a country like Egypt that received Soviet support. In this process, the Baathists, known for their proximity to the Soviets, increased their influence in the military and state echelons. This situation caused the US to fear that communists would take over the Sisi administration in Syria and led to another coup attempt via the CIA. However, this coup attempt was thwarted. Egypt had sent 4,000 soldiers to the Syrian city of Latakia. As a result of Nasser's pressure, Arab socialist leader Akram el-Hourani was appointed as the Speaker of Parliament, and Pan-Arabist Ba'ath Party co-founder Salah al-Din al-Bitar was appointed as the Foreign Minister. Thus, the socialists, who significantly increased their influence in the Syrian administration, paved the way for the unification of Egypt and Syria. During this process, King Faisal II of Iraq accused Syria of becoming a satellite state of the Soviet Union in 1958. Syria and Egypt united to establish a new state named the United Arab Republic. Gamal Abdel Nasser was elected president of this new state. The flag of the country was determined as 2 stars on red, white, and black stripes in July of the same year. As a result of a coup in Iraq, King Faisal II was overthrown and executed. The Hashemite Kingdom of Iraq was demolished, and the Republic of Iraq was established under the leadership of Abd al-Karim Qasim, receiving the support of communists and Kurds, promised to establish an autonomous Kurdish state in northern Iraq. At the same time, by withdrawing from the Baghdad Pact, which was established against the Soviet threat, he began to establish alliances with the Soviet Union and left-leaning countries. He wanted to join the United Arab Republic under Nasser's administration and become the 3rd star on the flag. Thus, a partial dominance of the Soviet Union was observed in the region. In Syria, while the Ba'ath Party members were initially Nasser's most natural and political allies, they were soon removed from their duties by Nasser. Hundreds of Syrian officers were either assigned to distant Egypt or forced into retirement. Egyptian administrators and officers were brought in their place. Furthermore, the Syrian Executive Council was liquidated, and all bureaucrats were shifted to Cairo. Egyptians were brought to important public positions, and Syrians remained in the background. Syria was almost being turned into a province of Egypt. This situation resulted in the Syrians' rebellion against Egyptian control. In 1961, another military coup occurred in Syria. Thus, the United Arab Republic dissolved, and the Syrian Arab Republic was established. However, the instability in the country never ended. 2 years later, on March 8, 1963, Ba'athist officers in Syria carried out a coup and seized power. Thus, the Ba'ath era officially began in Syrian history. The Ba'ath Party was founded by a Syrian Christian Arab nationalist named Michel Aflaq. Some claim that he was a Jew. The reason for this claim is that Michel Aflaq was the son-in-law of Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. According to Jews, an uncircumcised person was considered murdar unclean, and a girl would never be given to him. Since Christians are not circumcised, if Michel Aflaq were a real Christian, a girl would not have been given to him according to the Jewish faith. However, the Israeli Prime Minister saw no harm in marrying her daughter to Michel Aflaq. Therefore, these claims suggest that he hid his Jewishness behind a veil of Christianity. Ba'ath means rebirth. The full name of the Ba'ath Party founded by Michel Aflaq is the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Rebirth Party. This party had 3 main goals. First, to save Arabs from Islam, that is, to revive the Arabism from before Islam. Second, to unite Arabs. And third, to develop and strengthen Arabs. This ideological state of Syria, which was increasingly distancing itself from Islam, caused it to be excluded by other Arab states. The Syrian people, the majority of whom were Muslim, were not very pleased with this administration either. This situation led to the weakening of the party under Michel Aflaq's administration and many mass movements. A group of Syrian Ba'athist officers, wanting to turn the gradual weakening of the party into an opportunity, decided to establish a secret military committee within the party. The 3 officers who founded this committee were Muhammad Umran, Salah Jadid, and Hafez. The common feature of all 3 was that they were Nusayris. While the party was initially established by Sunnis and Nusayris together with other groups in the country, it took on a Nusayri-weighted form as the Sunnis weakened due to disagreements among themselves. Ultimately, this neo-Ba'athist military committee carried out an intra-party rebellion in February 1966 and took over the administration. This coup led to a split within the original Pan-Arabist Ba'ath Party. The original Ba'athists organized in Iraq and found the opportunity to spread their ideas there. Thus, the Ba'ath Party was divided into two, one in Syria and the other in Iraq. The Iraqi Ba'athists also seized power in Iraq through a coup in 1968. Thus, within a short time, Saddam Hussein in Iraq and Hafez al-Assad in Syria would become the prominent names of the Ba'ath governments. The enmity between these two parties, which carried the same name and mindset, would continue for many years. When the calendar showed the year 1967, Arab and Israeli forces engaged in war for the third time. The Arab alliance, led by Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, was also supported by Lebanon, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Sudan. Their aim was to end the State of Israel based on the idea of Pan-Arabism. While the Arabs were preparing for an attack on Israel, they were faced with a sudden attack by Israel. Warplanes taking off from Israel flew over the Mediterranean to Egypt on the morning of June 5 and managed to destroy at least 300 of Egypt's 450 planes on the same day. The attack was even more successful than expected for Israel. The Egyptians, who lost almost their entire air force in this attack, were faced with a total surprise. Then, the returning Israeli planes entered Syrian airspace and destroyed two-thirds of the Syrian air force. Thus, with these air attacks, Israel achieved full air superiority in the region. Subsequently, the Israeli land army acted on three fronts simultaneously. One wing routed the Jordanian forces in the east, driving the Jordanians out of the West Bank. Another wing routed the Egyptian land forces in Sinai, seizing the Sinai Peninsula, and another wing attacked the Golan Heights, taking control there. Thus, as a result of this war that lasted only 6 days, the lands under Israeli dominance expanded 2.5 times. The losses of the Arab countries were truly disastrous. The imbalance of the defeat caused a great moral collapse in the Arab people. Although America and Britain tried to hide the military support and intelligence they provided to Israel in this war to avoid turning the Arab states against them, they were not successful. Following the surfaced claims that the power that gave the pinpoint coordinates of the Egyptian land and air forces to the Israeli army and also deactivated the Egyptian air defense systems during this attack was America. 6 Arab countries decided to completely cut diplomatic ties with the United States. While anti-Americanism was increasing in the region, this situation went beyond the Arab world and led to countries like Iran, Pakistan, and other third world countries taking increasingly anti-American stances. As a result of this war, while Israel proved its power in the region, Pan-Arabist ideas entered a process of collapse among the Arab countries, realizing they could no longer destroy Israel, began to pursue the lands they lost to Israel, while Arab nationalism in the Middle East would gradually leave its place to Islamic and leftist movements. On the other hand, with Resolution 242 taken in the United Nations Security Council, Israel was asked to withdraw from all lands it occupied in the war. Indeed, many states, including Turkey, opposed Israel's expansion in the region in this way. Israel initially accepted this decision to avoid reaction. However, it would not withdraw from any occupied region until 1979. The Arabs, who tied their hopes to United Nations meetings and US-Soviet negotiations after the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, fell into despair because Israel did not implement undecisions and the problems could not be solved. Ultimately, they realized they had to fix this problem themselves, independent of external factors. Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, which emerged from the 1967 war defeated and having lost territory, re-equipped and organized their armies with the weapons and equipment they received after the war. Israel, during the same period, had started to produce weapons with its own means in addition to the modern weapons and equipment it received from America and France. In fact, during this period, even the necessary technical and personnel support for Israel to produce an atomic bomb was being provided by the United States. Ultimately, Egypt, under the leadership of Anwar Sadat, wanting to retake the Sinai Peninsula, and Syria, under the leadership of Hafez al-Assad, wanting to retake the Golan Heights, secretly agreed and decided to attack Israel. Other Arab countries stood by these two countries with weapons and all kinds of financial support. In this war, while the Soviet Union and the countries under its protection openly supported the Arabs, the United States and those under its protection did not hesitate to officially announce their support for Israel. The Egyptian and Syrian armies launched an attack simultaneously on the day the Israelis celebrated their greatest holiday, namely October 6, 1973, Yom Kippur. While the Egyptians crossed the Suez Canal and marched onto the Israeli forces in the Sinai Peninsula, the Syrians attacked the Golan Heights. Within a short time, the Syrian army seized the Golan Heights and began to advance into Israel. On the other hand, the Egyptian army also made progress in the Sinai Peninsula. In the meantime, Israel, which had gone into a red alert state, declared mobilization, brought an army of nearly 300,000 into existence, and acted quickly. Israel had given priority to the Syrian front. As a result of intense clashes lasting 3 days, the Israeli army pushed the Syrian army back to the pre-war ceasefire lines and dominated the Golan Heights. Continuing their attacks, the Israelis advanced as far as the Syrian capital, Damascus, within a week and began bombing the vicinity of Damascus. On the other hand, the Israeli army was also the superior side in the clashes in the Sinai Peninsula. When the Egyptian army began to retreat toward Cairo, the Israeli forces following it crossed the Suez Canal and advanced into the interior of Egypt. The Egyptians managed to stop the Israeli offensives about 5 kilometers east of the Ismail-Cairo road. Furthermore, although the United Nations intervened and took ceasefire decisions on October 22nd and October 24th, Israel did not comply with these decisions either. Thereupon, the United Nations sent a peacekeeping force to the region. Additionally, the Soviet Union had decided to send forces to the region to stop Israel. Upon this, the Israeli army, not daring to advance further, accepted the ceasefire on October 26 and stopped its attacks. At the end of the war, the Arabs lost 1,120 tanks and 8,500 soldiers, while Israel lost 600 tanks and 6,000 soldiers. The Yom Kippur War made Israel more dependent on the US in military, diplomatic, and economic fields than before. Immediately after the start of the war, Arab countries, led by King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, applied an oil embargo to many countries, primarily the United States and European countries, to punish the countries supporting Israel. This Arab oil embargo, conducted at such a critical time when the world was in great need of oil, went down in history as the 1973 oil crisis and caused a worldwide economic crisis. Ultimately, on March 17, 1974, Arab countries, except Libya, declared that they had ended the oil embargo against the US. A short time later, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia lost his life after being assassinated by his nephew Faisal bin Musaid, although it is still not known why the nephew Faisal bin Musaid committed the assassination. The fact that he had just recently returned from America caused many rumors at that time about America orchestrating this assassination. The first foreign policy action of Hafez al-Assad, who had come to power in Syria through a coup in the early 1970s, was to move closer to the Soviet Union. In February 1972, an economic and technical aid agreement was signed between the Soviet Union and Syria. This was followed by a military cooperation agreement. Thus, having gained the support of a power like the Soviet Union, Hafez al-Assad took strict measures in domestic policy. Since he was a Nusayri, he began to appoint his trusted and Nusayri supporters to key positions of the state. However, the number of Nusayris in the Syrian state was only 12%. Essentially, this was the minority ruling over the majority. But the Sunni majority in the country had not made this an issue initially, because regardless of his religion or sect, Hafez al-Assad was an Arab, and the common point they met on was Arab nationalism. Hafez al-Assad also prioritized this nationalist identity over his Alawite identity and promised a fair administration to society. Speaking of Nusayrism, it is necessary to talk a little about what Nusayrism is. The founder of Nusayrism is Muhammad bin Nusayr. He lost his life at the end of the 800s, about 60 years after his death. The Nusayri faith was codified into a book named Kitab al-Mekmud, consisting of 16 sections, by Hamdan al-Hasabi, an Iranian sheikh. This book is known as the Holy Book of Nusayrism. Their belief is that Ali is God. According to them, the word of martyrdom Shahada is, I testify that there is no God but Ali. Also believing in reincarnation, Nusayris believe that the soul of a deceased Nusayri passes into another human again. According to them, when people who are not Nusayris die, their souls remain on earth and pass into animals. Another characteristic of Nusayris is their belief that women do not have souls. According to them, demons were created from the sins of humans, and women were created from the sins of demons. In this respect, women are lowly creatures worthy of being seen as despised and base, to whom the secrets of the sect will not be explained. According to them, wine is sacred and it is mandatory to drink wine in religious ceremonies. They believe that Ali created Muhammad and he created Salman the Persian. For this reason, after saying words glorifying Ali, Muhammad, and Salman 5 times a day, they turn toward the sun and say, "O Supreme Ali, have mercy on us," thus supposedly performing their prayer worship. They believe that Hussein Hertz Hussein, just like Jesus HZISA, did not die and was raised to heaven. They see HZ Abu Bakr, HZ Umar, HZ Talha, HZ Sa'd, HZ Muawiyah, and Abdul Qadir Jailani as symbols of the devil and recite curses upon them. Due to these and many more extreme views, they are seen as infidels even by some Shias, although they are of the Shia sect. It is estimated that Nusayri, whose population reached 213,000 during the First World War, live today in the surroundings of Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, Turkestan, and Antalya, and in They are predominantly found in Syria. The Syria of the Hafez al-Assad era was excluded and marginalized by other Arab states due to its Shia-characterized administration. Thus, Hafez al-Assad, becoming isolated in the region, began to take steps toward moving closer to other Arab states. The most important of these steps was his pursuit of a strict anti-Israel policy together with the Arabs. In the Yom Kippur War of 1973, he declared war on Israel together with Egypt. Thus, he won the friendship of other Arab states. However, at the end of the war, Hafez al-Assad informed that he would demilitarize the region by withdrawing from the Golan Heights, which Israel wanted very much. In 1974, he signed the agreement on disengagement between forces together with Israel. According to this agreement, the region remained connected to Syria only on paper, and Israel was allowed to benefit from the water and agricultural areas in the region. But the real major development occurred on the Egyptian front. Henry Kissinger, who was the United States Secretary of State, was an Ashkenazi Jew. Indeed, in those years and even today, Jews are in a dominant position in all echelons of the United States. Henry Kissinger performed shuttle diplomacy by constantly going back and forth between Israel and Egypt, and finally ensured that these two states sat at the table. These two states sitting at a table in this way indicated that they would recognize each other as states. At the end of these secretly conducted negotiations, the 101st Kilometer Agreement was made in 1973 and the Camp David Accords in 1978. A year later, the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty was officially signed. With this treaty, Egypt declared that it officially recognized Israel as a state. While no Arab state had recognized Israel until that date, Egypt's recognition of Israel as a state was seen as a great betrayal in the eyes of the Arabs. Reacting to this treaty, 18 Arab states completely cut relations with Egypt, expelled Egypt from the Arab League, and stopped all aid given to Egypt. Thereupon, the United States began to provide many aids to Egypt. Thus, Egypt cutting its relations with the Soviets and joining the US bloc forced other Arab states to move closer to the Soviets. The Egyptian leader Anwar Sadat, who signed the treaty, was seen as a traitor in the eyes of the Arabs. 2 years later, he was assassinated by an Arab Egyptian soldier during a military ceremony. According to this peace treaty signed in 1979, the state of war between Egypt and Israel was ended, and the parties recognized each other's sovereignty and independence. Israel agreed to withdraw completely from the Sinai Peninsula. However, despite this, there was no article in the treaty regarding either Gaza or the West Bank. Essentially, although the autonomy of Gaza and the West Bank was agreed upon in the Camp David negotiations a year earlier, Israel and America refused to comply with this decision even today. Along with this, the United States officially committed to meeting all of Israel's military needs, including F-16 planes, not to participate in any proposal against Israel, and to support Israel in every way against all kinds of threats directed at Israel's existence, security, and sovereignty. America, which had supported Israel since its establishment, was clearly putting forth this stance on an official platform for the first time. On the other hand, in a magazine named Kivan, which began to be published by the Information Department of the World Zionist Organization in 1978, an interesting strategy map was published in an article titled A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. This article, prepared by Oded Yinon, a high-level official of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, created a great resonance worldwide, and went down in history as the Yinon Plan. According to this plan, the division and destabilization of the Middle East region ethnically and sectarians were targeted for Israel's security and regional dominance. According to Yinon, Iraq was a stronger country than Syria, and Iraq was seen as the greatest threat to Israel in the near future. For this reason, the division of Iraq was more prioritized than the division of Syria. Attention was drawn to the fact that although Shias constituted 60% of the country's population in Iraq, the power in administration was Sunni. Furthermore, the necessity of separating the Kurds living in the north of the country from the Iraqi administration and turning them into an independent state was put forward. Syria, on the other hand, was fundamentally no different from Lebanon. Attention was drawn to the fact that in Syria, where the majority was Sunni, the power and officers were Shia Nusayri, and to the Druze living in the south of the country. While Yinon determined the weak points of states stretching one by one from India to Morocco and from Somalia to Turkey, he wrote the following for Turkey. Turkey's population consists of a 50% Turkish Sunni majority and two large minorities, 12 million Shia Alawites, 6 million Sunni Kurds. In these years, the most effective movements increasingly rising in all people of the region were Islamic movements. Muslims living in secular orders were organizing and rising for an Islamic order. This was the most dangerous thing, according to Israel, because only 100 years ago, the region was a Muslim region completely connected to the Ottoman Caliphate. The majority of the region still consisted of Sunni Muslims. For Israel, which was trying to separate the states in the region from each other with various policies, the most dangerous thing was the provision of a Sunni Islamic union between Turks, Arabs, and Kurds. If it were to hold on here, it first had to prevent the movements of return to Islam rising at the level of the people in the region. Initially, nationalist policies were supported to completely sever the common Sunni ties between Turks, Arabs, and Kurds. However, this was no longer sufficient. It had to prevent the Islamic rise and also set Muslims against each other by spreading Islamophobia all over the world through the media against the increasingly rising Islamic movements. For this, it was first necessary to make Shias and Sunnis clash in the region. For throughout history, Shias and Sunnis had always fought. It was necessary to awaken this enmity again. Although Syria was the only state in the region governed by Shia administrators, the state was in a secular order and its people were also predominantly Sunni. The state where Shias were found in the greatest number was Iran. At that time, Shia mullahs were not pleased with the secular administration of Shah Pahlavi of Iran and were inclined to rebel due to the land reform conducted. Additionally, there was a leftist section whose number could not be underestimated, who were against the Shah, who had very close relations with America. The Zionists seem to have preferred to secretly support this opposition against the Shah in the country. After a while, Shias pouring into the streets all across Iran began protesting against Shah Pahlavi and instigating street riots. At that time, the Shia cleric Khomeini, who had been exiled from the country by the Shah, was in France. During his days in France, Khomeini was featured in the Western media every day and was turned into a symbol of the Shia resistance against the Shah, faced with the massive power of the opposition. Emboldened by Khomeini becoming the lead figure of the Shia movement, Shah Pahlavi could no longer resist and finally fled the country in 1979. Iran fell into the hands of the Shia rebels. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran, would state in the memoirs he wrote after his flight that he was essentially overthrown by America and Western powers. Khomeini, brought from France to Iran by plane, was placed at the head of this Shia revolution in Iran. The name of the newly established state was the Islamic Republic of Iran. Thus, for the first time in the region, a Shia state was established. The first action of this newly founded Shia state was to enter into a war with Iraq. A year later, while the Iran-Iraq war continued, Israel sold $500 million worth of weapons to Iran. On the other hand, Israeli warplanes provided military support to Iran by hitting critical points in Iraq during this war. Interestingly, while the Iranian leader Khomeini was constantly making threats toward Israel and engaging in anti-American rhetoric in his speeches, Israel and America were providing intelligence and training, assistance to the Iranian army through military advisors. The Irangate scandal, which erupted in 1986, would expose this clandestine cooperation between Israel, the US, and Iran. Although the Iranian leader Khomeini claimed he received nothing from the Great Satan America, the surfaced secret video recordings of American and Iranian officials clearly brought America's arms support to Iran to light. We know that Israel sent weapons to Iran in 1985. To some reports, The Israeli government contacted your administration and suggested that you get in touch with Iran. Can you explain Israel's role in this event to us? This event went down in history as the Irangate scandal and shocked the entire world. 10 days before the outbreak of the Iran-Iraq War, on September 12, 1980, a military coup took place in Turkey, led by Kenan Evren. This coup, known in Turkish history as the 80 coup, achieved total success, and the country began to be managed by the military administration led by Kenan Evren. On the night of the coup, a diplomat told Paul Hensler, the CIA's Turkey station chief, "The boys in Ankara did it." This phrase further increased suspicions that America was behind the 1980 coup. On the other hand, the most effective force in the country against the Shia Nusayri administration in Syria was the Muslim Brotherhood movement. In 1980, 1,152 Muslims in Palmyra prison were massacred under torture by the unlawful order of Hafez. This situation caused the Muslims in the country to rise up. These Muslims, who rebelled against the Nusayri administration, soon took control of cities like Aleppo and Hama. The military force of the new regime consisted mostly of Shabiha, brought in from Nusayri villages. Members of the Muslim Brotherhood, however, mostly consisted of the urban Sunni middle class. Hafez al-Assad's army began bombing everyone in these cities with artillery and planes, making no distinction for civilians. According to allegations, they caused massive deaths by using many chemical weapons, including hydrogen cyanide. The Muslims in the country asked for help from Turkey in the face of these merciless massacres. However, the coup general Kenan Evren, who was ruling Turkey, did not respond to these cries for help. Thereupon the Muslims asked for help from the Arabs and even the Westerners. However, no one extended a helping hand to them. As a result of these bombings, tens of thousands of people lost their lives. When the resistance of the Muslims, who had become thoroughly weakened by the airstrikes, was broken, the regime army entered the city of Hama by land with its tanks and artillery. Hafez al-Assad had declared everyone living in the city of Hama a rebel. In reality, almost the entire population of this city was Sunni. The Shabiha showed no mercy to anyone, and massacred everyone they encountered without discrimination. Women and even children were subjected to rape and mercilessly murdered. According to the official figures of the Syrian Human Rights Committee, more than 40,000 Muslims were massacred in Hama. There was no room left in the prisons in Syria. For this reason, Hafez al-Assad had to build new prisons. The construction of the infamous Sednaya prison began during these years. This horrific event went down in history as the Hama massacre. After these massacres, the Islamic resistance in Syria came to an end. The losses suffered by the Muslim Brotherhood movement were immense. Most had fallen martyr under the torture of the Shabiha. Those who survived either left the armed struggle and departed the country or went into hiding. More than 800,000 Syrians were forced to flee the country. The strongest state Hafez al-Assad leaned on while committing these massacres was the Soviet Union. In 1980, these two countries had signed a 20-year friendship and cooperation agreement. Hafez al-Assad, having thus bloodily suppressed the Muslim Brotherhood movement, signed another agreement with the Soviet Union 3 months later. According to this agreement, the Soviet Union would provide weapons and technical aid to Syria. Furthermore, while all the Arab states supported Iraq against Shia Iran in the Iran-Iraq War, the only Arab state to support Iran was Syria. You might think the reason for this was because the rulers of both states were Shia. However, although the Nusayris are from a branch of Shiism, they were considered infidels, even by the dominant Shias in Iran. In this regard, the reason for this closeness between Syria and Iran was political rather than sectarian. In particular, the rivalry between Hafez al-Assad and Saddam Hussein caused Syria to support the Iranian side, just like Israel and America did in this war. The Iranian religious leader Khomeini began to establish close ties with the Syrian Shia. Against the overwhelming superiority of the Sunni population in the Middle East, the Shia powers needed to unite, for the Sunnis were the common enemy of both, and both saw the Sunnis as infidels. For this purpose, religion was instrumentalized for politics by the new Shia Imam. It was declared in Iran that the Nusayris, who worshipped Ali, were Muslims. Thus, these two powers united against the Sunnis in the region and became allies. There was no winner of the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted for 8 years. Throughout the war, while Iran tried to draw the Scythians, who made up 60% of the Iraqi population, to its side through sectarian bigotry, Iraq used Arab nationalism to trigger ethnic enmity against the Persians. During this time, the Kurds living in the north of the country cooperated with Iran to rebel against Saddam Hussein and declared that they had established an autonomous Kurdish state in northern Iraq. Saddam Hussein was very angry at this rebellion of the Kurds and organized attacks with chemical weapons on the Kurds living in the region, making no distinction between women and children. More than 5,000 people lost their lives in these attacks, and most were injured. Ultimately, the rebellion was brought under control and a ceasefire was made with Iran. By the end of the war, more than 1 million people had lost their lives, and both countries had lost power by suffering billions of dollars in damage. This war increased the loyalty of the people in Iran to the newly established Shia administration. Iraq, on the other hand, was heavily indebted to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait at the end of the war. Saddam Hussein, who had too many weapons in his hands at the end of the war, was in a massive economic crisis. Finally, by refusing to pay his debts to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, he attempted to invade Kuwait in order to seize its oil reserves. Saddam Hussein's aggressive stance, based on the principle of gathering Arabs under a single flag, led to the establishment of a coalition of 35 countries led by the US against him. Saddam Hussein, left alone against this coalition, which included Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Syria, was forced to withdraw after suffering heavy losses. Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait caused a deep divide in the Arab world. By 1991, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and thus the Cold War came to an end. Although the Syrian-Russian relations seemed to weaken with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the newly established Russian Federation soon strengthened this Syrian and Russian alliance again. Additionally, the Russian Federation began to establish closeness with Iran, Syria's most important ally in the region. Syrian President Hafez al-Assad positioned his family as a strategic center of power that ensured the continuity of the regime in Syria. Every individual within the family was raised to be a part of the regime, although Hafez al-Assad's wife, Anisa Maklouf, was not seen directly at the political forefront. She was influential over the power within the family and the education of her children. Anisa's role was significant in Hafez al-Assad's efforts to transform the regime into a dynasty-like structure. Anisa was of critical importance in ensuring the continuity of the regime by keeping the family together. The eldest male child of the family, Basil, was raised as Hafez al-Assad's successor. Basil, who had a charismatic and assertive personality, showed promise for the future of both his family and the regime. When Hafez al-Assad died, his eldest son Basil was to take his place. However, his death in a traffic accident in 1994 deeply shook the family and the regime. Basil's death completely changed the balances in the Assad family and upset the regime's leadership plans. At that time, Hafez al-Assad was busy solidifying his own power and securing the future of the regime. In this context, Hafez al-Assad's second eldest son, Bashar al-Assad, was also being shaped as a leader. Bushra, Hafez al-Assad's only daughter and eldest child, was an important figure in the behind-the-scenes functioning of the regime. Her husband, Asef Shokat, played a key role in the security and military strategies of the regime, while Bushra strengthened the bonds within the family. She contributed indirectly to the regime's security and foreign policy strategies. Hafez al-Assad's third male child, Majd al-Assad, had psychological problems. Therefore, he was a quiet personality about whom there was not much information. Maher al-Assad, the most aggressive personality of the family, was Hafez al-Assad's youngest son. He was a key name in the security forces. In particular, Maher's harsh methods in suppressing internal turmoil became one of the cornerstones of the regime's security structure. Maher was the armed force of the Assad family. Despite all these characteristics, he had a personality too unstable to be the heir, so much so that he went as far as shooting and wounding his sister Bushra al-Assad's husband, Asef Shokat, in the stomach with a gun. Maher al-Assad was one of those primarily responsible for the massacre of many innocent people in the Syrian civil war. While Hafez al-Assad aimed to increase public support on one hand, he consolidated his power by using all social areas as a propaganda tool on the other. The Assad regime was developing projects aiming to bring the Ba'ath ideology to every segment of society. The importance of Arab nationalism and socialism was taught in schools, and young people were encouraged to be loyal to the regime. In the history books taught in schools during this period, seeds of enmity toward Turks and the Caliphate were sown in Syrian youth by telling them that the Ottomans occupied Syria and exploited its lands. Films, theatrical works, and visual arts were filled with themes processing the values of the Arab League and the Ba'ath ideology, positioning the Assad regime as a savior. All mainstream media outlets were under the direct control of the regime. This ensured that the public received information only within the framework determined by the regime and largely prevented the spread of alternative views. The Assad regime, shaped under the mask of modernization, development, and Arab nationalism, contained a very different story behind the scenes. Hafez al-Assad, who painted an image of a leader offering prosperity to his people in the eyes of the world, was in reality building a system that perfectly operated mechanisms of pressure, fear, and control to protect his power. Not even the slightest opposition to the Assad power was allowed in the country. All Syrians inside and outside the country were taken under close surveillance through the intelligence agency, or Mukhabarat. During these times, the Kurdish community in the north of the country voiced various demands regarding issues such as citizenship rights, freedom of cultural expression, and economic equality. However, these demands clashed with the Syrian state's policies based on Arab nationalism. The use of the Kurdish language in public areas was prohibited, Kurdish books were confiscated, and cultural activities were put under strict supervision. Kurds were forced to change their names to Arabic names, and the names of Kurdish settlements were changed to Arabic names. Tens of thousands of Kurds living in the Hasaka region were deprived of their identities on the grounds that they were not suitable for citizenship rights and were reduced to the status of foreigners. Ultimately, the citizenship rights of the Kurds in the country were completely taken away, and Kurds were officially declared stateless. This situation pushed the Kurdish population in the region closer to the peak, which aimed to establish a Kurdistan, despite all these harsh policies implemented against the Kurds. Hafez al-Assad did not refrain from protecting the PKK leader Abdullah K. Safe areas were created for PKK terrorists in Syria and Lebanon where they could receive training. Using Syria's influence over Lebanon, the PKK was allowed to establish camps in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. This region became the organization's training and logistics center. Subsequently, PKK camps were established in northern Syria for them to receive armed training and organize attacks on Turkey. Although Turkey explicitly warned Syria on this issue, Hafez al-Assad defended that he had no connection with the PKK. The intensity of the PKK's attacks toward Turkey further hardened Turkey's reaction to Syria, especially the increasing loss of life in clashes in the southeast Anatolia caused Turkey to define Syria as a supporter of terror. By 1998, the Turkey-Syria tension went beyond a diplomatic crisis and created a possibility of a military conflict. The commander of the land forces of the period, General Atiyah, brought this tension to its peak with the harsh statements he made on the Syrian border. Some of our neighbors, like Syria, have involved Turkey in the plague of terror by harboring the bandits called Apo in their own countries and supporting them. General Ates, stating that if Syria did not cut the support it gave to the PKK, the consequences would be heavy, clearly put Turkey's option of military intervention on the agenda. This statement was the final and most serious warning given to Syria. Subsequently, Turkey made the possibility of a military operation concrete by sending a large number of troops to the Syrian border. This situation created a serious concern in the Hafez al-Assad regime. Turkey's increasing pressure and the threat of military intervention caused Syria to step back. The crisis was solved diplomatically with the Adana Memorandum signed in 1998. According to this memorandum reached between Turkey and Syria, Syria committed to ending the activities of the PKK and not providing support to the organization. It began to close the PKK's camps in Syria. Following the memorandum, Abdullah Öcalan left Syria and tried to take refuge in various countries. This process resulted in his capture in Kenya in 1999. The Turkey-Syria crisis was an important turning point, shaping the future of relations between the two countries. This crisis created a deep distrust between the two countries and left a lasting mark on Syria-Turkey relations. By June of 2000, Hafez al-Assad passed away due to a heart attack. With his death, his son Bashar al-Assad took the stage as Syria's new president, taking over his father's legacy. Bashar maintained the authoritarian elements of this legacy on one hand, while drawing attention with discourses of modernization and reform on the other. This change in leadership was one of the most important turning points in Syria's history. It was the beginning of a new era that would shape the future of this country.